Environmental Services Department Director, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this important planning workshop. I'm excited that we're doing something new today and having the opportunity to dive deeper into questions. We appreciate your patience as we're going to test out some new technology and interactive discussion with old school whiteboards to take us through today. Again, we have a unique opportunity to delve deeper into critical policy questions that will shape how we manage our regional garbage and recycling system. We know this system is intricate and constantly evolving. It's influenced by economic shifts that impact our recycling rates and waste production, changes in manufacturing and consumer behavior that results in an ever-changing waste stream, technological advancements aimed at achieving our climate goals, and ongoing scientific research to evaluate and measure our policies and practices. Our region, as you know, has adopted a hybrid approach to managing the system, with public, private, and nonprofit organizations all playing critical roles in providing essential services to the communities throughout the region. Over the past 2 decades, and as outlined within the Regional Waste Plan, our priorities have consistently focused on reducing waste, protecting health and the environment, and ensuring equitable access to excellent garbage and recycling services. However, to make further progress, we must address existing gaps in our system. Currently, the distribution of our facilities means that some residents have easy access to services such as household hazardous waste, disposal, or furniture recycling, while others do not, and this is most prominent on our east and west sides of our region. The goal of our system facilities plan is to create a comprehensive blueprint for future investments to modernize our system. Over the past year, with input from diverse stakeholders, including industry representatives, the recycling and reuse sector, and community members, we've been exploring and narrowing in on 4 scenarios of what the system facilities plan and strategic investments could look like. As we've explored these scenarios, several key questions about Metro's role have arisen, along with potential policy levers and investment areas needed to address system gaps. Today's workshop is designed to tackle these broader policy questions and key areas of investment, which will guide the final development of the system facilities plan. These policy questions are critical. They will determine which aspects of our scenarios we pursue. Our purpose today is to examine these policy issues, understand their impact on the system facilities plan, and consider the trade-offs involved. For each of the policy areas, we have purposely offered you a spectrum of choices, much like the scenarios that we explored earlier in the plan development. These range from the status quo to 2 different extremes that offer options anywhere in between. To accomplish this today, we're going to use an interactive activity. Our desired outcome of this workshop is to achieve clear direction from Council on as many of the 6 policy areas as possible. Where differences remain, we aim to narrow them down to 2 options that staff can further evaluate and bring back for more detailed consideration. We have our facilitator for our workshop today, Maria Elena Kempis-Dagay, doing a terrible job, to help us have this conversation. Maria Elena is principal with Metropolitan Group, a social impact communication firm based in Portland. Over the past 5 years, I've had the pleasure of working with her. She's been involved closely with Metro and facilitating local government engagement on the regional waste plan, facilitating budget forums, supporting strategic communications work for the system facilities plan. And we also have our WPES team here in the audience that will be available to answer more detailed questions as we dive into the discussion. Thank you for your participation and commitment to this vital work. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Maria Elena.
Thanks, Martha. Good morning. So it's Maria Elena Kempis-Dagay, and it's such a pleasure to be with you. Today's workshop is designed to be interactive, informative, and as much as possible to help you build a collective scenario for the region's reuse, recycling, and garbage system that reflects your policy preferences and considers all that you have heard from stakeholders' input thus far. So my role will be to create space for all of your voices and perspectives to be heard throughout the conversation, to help you explore policy choices, and to help surface areas where you agree, areas where you're not in alignment, and areas where you need more discussion, more dialogue in order to reach consensus. And all of that doesn't have to happen today. I just want to make sure that that's clear. As Martha mentioned, the goal is to get clear direction from you as a council on as many of the 6 policy areas as possible. And we do really want to make sure that you feel comfortable identifying those areas where you're not quite there yet and you need more information and conversation. There might even be some points where there's a non-negotiable for you, and really, we really want to encourage you to raise that. So to accomplish this, we've got an agenda that's up. We'll briefly start on the values and outcomes that guide this work and review a snapshot of the project context. Then we'll do a round where we'll ask each of the council members to identify their personal priorities guiding the decisions about the garbage and recycling system. And then with that foundation in place, staff will provide an overview of the policy options that you have before you. And then we will come back to each council member to ask you for your policy preferences, and we will ask you to stand up and put your preferences up on the board. And don't worry, there'll be more instruction to come. We'll help out with that. But that will be, that will set the stage for the discussion on impacts and trade-offs on the areas where you differ. So we'll do that, and then we'll wrap up with an exercise to see where there's consensus and where there's a need for more information. So now I'm going to ask Esty Siegel to set some context, remind us how we reached this point in the project. Next slide, please.
Good morning, councilors. Esty Siegel. I'm a principal planner in Waste Prevention Environmental Services Department. Good to see you. So yes, I would like to start off just reminding us where that we established values and outcomes with your input in the first phase of the project, and really have guided us in development of this plan so far. The values come from the 2030 Regional Waste Plan, with an additional value added to prioritize tribal engagement. Council's 3 priority outcomes also direct our work on this project, and these we heard from you over the months that we've presented to you about this project. First, around waste reduction, that new facilities and programs should focus on reducing waste and the amount of materials going to the landfill. Secondly, access. The plan should improve the quality and access to reuse, recycling, and garbage services across the region. And then affordability. The plan should aim to keep services affordable and cost impacts to community members low. Next slide, please. So building on the project's values and outcomes and the system gaps identified in phases 1 and 2, we are now here in the 3rd phase of the project. At the Fall Symposium, we explored 4 scenarios that represent 4 different approaches to improving the reuse, recycling, and garbage system, and discussed them with stakeholders and then with council. And next slide, please. What we heard is that almost 60% of project stakeholders that were engaged preferred the distributed scenario, in which Metro would build a network of distributed and mid-sized facilities across the 3 counties. But many liked elements in the no-build and full-service scenarios as well. In January, councilors also indicated a preference for the distributed scenario through an informal poll offered by Council President Peterson. And in this session, President Peterson noted a general agreement by council on the distributed scenario, but requested the opportunity to narrow options, discuss roles, trade-offs, impacts, and costs before the team proceeded with drafting a full plan. And that really brings us to today to discuss some of the major policy options that Marta and Maria Elena described, but really those options within the scenarios to help focus recommendations on a specific set of facility and program investments to improve the system going forward. So now back to Maria Elena.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's begin by asking each council member just giving the opportunity to name the top 3 priorities that you're each centering when making decisions about the garbage and recycling system. Oh, well, thank you for volunteering. Give me 1 second, Counselor. These might even be some of the motivators that drove you to run for council in the first place. So if you can be as succinct as possible when sharing, we're going to capture these on the board behind you there so that we have them visible during the conversation. Councilor Gonzalez, would you like to lead off?
I would love to. Well, long time coming for this conversation, and as a person that likes games, I love the gamification of policy and getting to play with my closest colleagues, you know. But anyway, to be succinct with the question on top 3 priorities, if I had to put them in one word, it's community, environment, and prosperity. But to build those up a little bit more, community is, and looking at it through the lens of my district, is making sure that people in Washington County have access to the services that they need. And I think that translates to every corner of the region, folks having the resources. Second is building a system that supports our ambitious goals for the environment and prioritizing investments that help us reach those goals across the areas that we'll discuss later. And then third is the prosperity, which is something that I've thought a lot about with my time on council, is the benefits and burdens of the system, ensuring that the wealth generated by our garbage also reaches our communities, our local companies, and there's a whole bunch of different stuff around that we'll share about more.
Thank you. So Esty, what I captured was community, so access to services, environment, and particular investments in recycle and reuse, and prosperity, I would say like equitable access to wealth generation. Does that capture it, Councilor?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Got it.
Do we have any other volunteers? Councilor Simpson, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I'll be real quick. I do want to add, I have a fourth. I love wealth creation, but I'm gonna let Councilor Gonzalez have that. Waste reduction obviously is a big one for me, and investing in a real reuse market in line with that community aspect. And then for me, it comes down to affordability and consistency in those rates. And then a big one is just geographic access, making sure there's an equitable distribution across the region so that folks have access to our depots and other spaces.
Okay, so as a quick summary, thank you. Waste reduction, affordability, and equitable access and distribution of wealth.
Absolutely. Well, and especially around affordability, consistency.
And consistency.
Yeah.
Did you get that, Esty? Okay. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Lewis.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. My first is landfill diversion. And by that, I mean both reuse and also new markets for recycling and the circular economy. The next is workforce, and that's equity and real wages. And then everywhere is clean. Needs no further statement.
Everywhere is clean. Do you need a recap on that, Esty?
Yes, the second one. These are
Workforce is both equity and wages.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone?
Oh, and for landfill diversion,
Yes.
both new markets and reuse.
Standards, thank you.
There's a theme here, I think. Benefit of going a little later in the process is you get to have heard some of your priorities already, although they're framed a bit differently. My top priority is reduction. Diversion is great, but reduction in total waste is the way I think of it. And I think that's where you're getting to, Councilor Lewis. Reduction in the total waste.
Sorry, excuse me, Councilor Nolan, could you speak a little closer to the mic, please?
Sure. Reduction
Thank you.
in wet waste, although it's not all wet waste. In fact, plastics are a big part of it. Second one is climate friendliness. The system should be designed to incorporate public and private facilities in ways that minimize the greenhouse gas effects of collecting, restoring, reusing, and disposing of the waste. And my third priority is respecting and supporting the private investments that have already been made as part of this overall system.
Thank you, Counselor. Esty, do you need anything on there? Reduction of wet waste and plastics, climate friendly, minimizing greenhouse gases. And then respecting and supporting private investments in the system. Does that capture it, Counselor? Okay. Counselor Rosenthal, would you like to go next?
Not particularly, but
We can.
Too many other places.
a lot of good ideas have been covered already. I would add education, because waste production is a human issue. Toxic waste control and reduction.
Reduction. Okay, so education, toxic waste control and reduction.
And I probably actually should have said eliminating the service deserts.
I didn't catch that.
Eliminating the service deserts as illustrated in these charts where there's areas where people don't have access.
Thank you. President Peterson, would you like to go?
Yeah. Whether it's reduced waste to landfill and or landfill diversion, I think they're the same thing. I know they're not really, because one is trying to promote upstream and the other is trying to deal with the downstream. But to me, it's like all part of the continuum of just reducing waste. And then reduction of financial risk to Metro over time, because if we're building bigger and larger, more expensive facilities that are now dependent on waste increasing or increasing rates, then I think we're at risk in the future if we're actually trying to reduce waste. And then more Metro, or move Metro's role to filling gaps in service not provided by the private sector.
Excellent. Thank you.
And let me just say, the reason I put those three is because I feel like the council has already said that climate change and racial equity are overall lenses that we apply to everything we do. So I feel like that should be the given. And then how do we start talking about the policies under that?
Thank you for that clarification. Did you get that?
I did, yep.
Okay, so we will just keep these here. These are the motivators that drive your decision making, and so we'll just keep those posted. And feel free to get up and see it because it's kind of hard to see the green, but we'll kind of keep going. So thank you. I'm gonna now pass it to Luis Sandoval to introduce the activity and each of the policy areas and the spectrum of choices in more detail. He's not going to name trade-offs and impacts. We're gonna leave these for the discussion post our activity, but feel free to jot down. You've got some larger cards before you. With the headline, the headers of the policy choices and some blanks if you want to take any kind of notes. Those are the cards that you'll be posting up here. And then capture your clarifying questions, which we will address at the end. One of the things that we're also going to do, and I'm going to ask Luis to do, is to, after presenting each policy choice, take a breath, Luis, take a second, take a pause, and then that way you have time to jot down any thoughts, any questions before we go on the next one. Ready to go?
Yes, thank you, Marilena. Good morning, Council President Peterson. Good morning, councilors. So I will do a little bit of a recap of the activity that, do I need to turn it on?
Try again.
I've been trying, but
Do you see a red light?
nope. Is it on? No light. Oh, I think you can hear me.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick recap of the activity that we walked through during the council briefings. And this interactive activity lays out policy choices for council to discuss and set direction. We reviewed it during the briefing, so hopefully this feels familiar, and it's good to see that you brought your original cards. And then can you go on to the next slide, please? So this is this activity. You know, you received a board and a set of cards representing policy choices in 6 key areas for making investment decisions about reuse, recycling, and garbage facilities. The first 2 areas, wet waste tonnage flow and regulation of private solid waste facilities, deal with council policy and Metro's regulatory approach. The other 4 policy areas cover choices for Metro to make in terms of operating facilities and investing in private and nonprofit service providers. And of course, different policy choices lead to different outcomes for the region, and they also fill gaps in the system in different ways and to varying degrees. Next slide, please. So each of the cards we shared with you before had a title bar and bullet points describing each of the options named in the card, describing a particular role or level of involvement for Metro. As the slide shows, the cards you have before you today only have the title bar and your name, with space for you to write any key points about your preference. And these are the cards that we will be using for the board there. And as Marta noted, the options in each policy area show 2 extremes to provide flexibility anywhere in between. The cards therefore encompass a wide range of policy choices and not every choice available to Metro Council within that spectrum. That is why it's important to use the cards to write any notes about those. Perhaps you want a policy preference that is not captured by those extremes or the status quo. The policy choices presented in this activity are meant to be simple and broad, and we intentionally stayed at this level to focus on your policy preferences, but we're ready to discuss any of your options in more detail and their trade-offs. So in this exercise, we're asking council to indicate direction, but not necessarily the nitty-gritty, the details of each of those choices. We can explore, answer questions, and if needed, come back to you with more details. The policy choices presented in this activity, among the 6 policy areas represented on the board, only the reuse and repair category allows for more than one policy option to be selected. The other 5 categories allow for only one policy direction. I will now walk through each of the 6 policy areas in a bit more detail. And as Maria Elena pointed out, I will take a little pause after each area for you to take notes, and then I will respond to questions at the end. Next slide, please. The first policy area we have is wet waste tonnage flow, which relates to Metro's authority to designate how much wet waste flows to Metro transfer stations and how much to private facilities. When we say wet waste, we are talking about putrescible waste or mixed garbage that has some amount of organic material, such as kitchen waste. Currently, the policy in Metro Code reserves a minimum of 40% of all the wet waste generated in the region for the 2 existing Metro transfer stations. In this case, the Metro guaranteed 40% card represents the status quo. And that card keeps the same policy and applies it to Central and South and any new facility that Metro Council may approve if you choose that card, that option. The other 2 cards represent changes to the status quo, but in opposite directions. The no guarantee for Metro card would eliminate the policy of reserving tonnage for Metro facilities. And then on the other extreme, the Metro's share increases option would increase the minimum tonnage allocated to Metro facilities above 40%. And this one is probably the most straightforward area. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, back up. You assume that no guarantee means Metro ends up with less than 40%. Are there, what's the basis behind that? Are we assuming then that Metro Central and South are less competitive than the private market, that without the guarantee, we'd have less? I don't know that that's a reasonable assumption. I think without a guarantee, Metro's tonnage could go up or down.
We're not making assumptions about that card. It's just, it would eliminate the policy, and then we could work to see what the potential impact is. And
I was gonna ask if we could hold questions until the end, if that's.
I think just to reiterate, these are the extremes, right? And I personally don't agree with no guarantee for Metro, like I'm somewhere else in the midst of the gray area, right? But I think what staff are trying to say is, here are the extremes, here's where we're at. Which direction do you generally want to move and why? So I, like on my card for this one, I'm not for no guarantee for Metro, but I'm like, want to move in a different direction. So I wrote down on the card what I actually want to see. Does that help?
It's my question, I am questioning the labels on the extremes of this range. I don't think no guarantee for Metro necessarily is leaning toward private sector.
So perhaps it could have been articulated that there's no guarantee in Metro policy. I mean, this is really intended to show what are the levers that council has in managing the system, and one of those is directing flow to our station. So
I've belabored it enough.
There's another option embedded in all of that you're pointing out.
Well, the option would be, the range is regulated to free market, not public to private.
I think those would be better labels for this one.
Yeah, and then the challenge too is that the choices depend on how many new facilities Metro Council allows into the system, how many facilities exit the system. So historically, Metro transfer stations have had a higher share than 40% of the wet waste, even with the minimum 40%. But that has changed over time, depending on the number of facilities, the location of private facilities, and how much they charge in comparison to Metro. So that was the intent behind. So I think, yeah, probably better labeling would have helped. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next slide, please. So the second policy area is the regulation of private solid waste facilities by Metro. For this area, we have 4 options. The status quo is keep existing regulation. And this option, for example, keeps the existing wet waste tonnage allocations policy, which sets a cap on the maximum amount of wet waste that private transfer stations are allowed to receive annually. It also keeps the licensing and other requirements that Metro sets for all private facilities that Metro regulates, including transfer stations, material recovery facilities, and others. The limited Metro regulation option would shift the status quo towards less regulation, including moving to an open market for wet waste in which private facilities have no restrictions on the amount of waste they can accept from customers. On the other extreme, we have 2 options that increase the level of private facility regulation. Increased Metro regulation points to options such as requiring private facilities to provide more services or setting the maximum rates private facilities can charge their customers for accepting wet waste and potentially other types of waste if that's what council wants to explore. The franchise model would divide the region into geographic zones or franchise areas, and Metro would require that waste from each zone can only go to select facilities. We'll pause a little bit to see anyone needs to take notes. And
I actually have a question on the last slide. Sorry, I was gonna try and wait till the end, but I can't let it go. So as it currently stands, our policy of the 40% Metro guarantee that's the minimum,
minimum,
right?
yes.
So nothing is preventing Metro from getting 60 or 70% in current market conditions. It's just the minimum of 40.
Yes, it says the floor.
Okay, so we set the floor and the market has reacted to the floor, and then the tonnage is going to other places based off of the allocation.
Yes.
Okay,
correct.
just wanted to confirm.
And then on the other side, the tonnage allocation sets a maximum amount of waste that can be allocated to the private sector. So it sets maximum caps for private facilities.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the remaining 4 areas for discussion are all related to facilities: commercial transfer stations, organics, community drop-off depots, and reuse and repair. In the commercial transfer stations area, we focus on facilities that accept wet and dry waste. And we, as you recall during the briefings, we mentioned that we are narrowing on wet and dry waste for this area. And then we're separating organics as a separate policy area. In the status quo, Metro Central and Metro South would continue accepting both wet and dry waste from commercial haulers. The no haulers at Metro facilities card is one at the end of the spectrum and considers the option for Metro facilities to no longer accept wet and dry waste from haulers. And again, that's on the extreme. So there's a continuum of options in between. On the other side of the spectrum is the more Metro transfer stations option, which considers adding more Metro-owned facilities to accept wet and dry waste from haulers. This could include, for example, building a commercial transfer station on the Cornelius site and potentially in other areas. And next slide, please. The organics policy area focuses on facilities that accept food waste, yard debris, and wood collected by haulers. We chose to create a separate policy area for organics because this waste stream tends to be less profitable for private facilities. And as a result, fewer facilities in the system are willing to accept these materials, especially food waste. In this policy area, the status quo would mean that Central and South continue accepting food waste, yard debris, and wood from haulers. Then on one extreme, council could consider the option of not accepting organics at Metro facilities and instead having only private facilities do so. This option does consider the possibility of Metro subsidizing private facilities to accept food waste from haulers as the least profitable waste stream.
Just a clarification, not a question. So I'm looking at my 2 cards, my little Monopoly cards here. One says all private with Metro funding, only private facilities transfer process organics. Metro subsidizes private facilities for taking food. But then there's another card, which I think is this entire second bullet point of subsidizing private facilities. Metro adds more organic transfer facilities, adds processing facilities and biodigesting and composting.
So that
I feel like this card is embedded in this card.
I don't see. So you're referring to the second card is the more transfer and processing card, right?
Yes, but I guess help me understand how it's different from that second bullet point, Metro subsidizes private facilities.
So the more transfer and processing does not include subsidies to private facilities, and instead Metro would be building facilities to collect organics from haulers in areas where there are facilities missing for that waste stream. So for example, currently in District 4, there is no facility that accepts food waste, commercial food scraps from haulers, and we have a Cornelius site there. Council could decide to add a facility that accepts only organics, only food waste, or all waste streams from haulers. But this card, the more transfer and processing card, is saying, in that case, Metro would be building those facilities instead of subsidizing private facilities for accepting them. But I think I realized that there's that they're not mutually exclusive is maybe what you're getting at, that Metro could build processing facilities and at the same time subsidize private facilities. Correct.
And we could partner as
And
well.
we can partner, yes. Yes. So public-private partnerships are embedded in the Metro adds more facilities because that's usually what Metro does, we have two transfer stations and they're operated by a third party, a contractor. And then we could do any spectrum, any choice in the spectrum of public-private partnership, meaning Metro builds it and doesn't operate it, or all the way to, or I'm sorry, or the current model where we build and own and hire a contractor to operate part of the facility. So there's a hybrid operation there.
I'm gonna break the game.
Okay.
Just use two of these cards.
Yes, please. And then you do,
Yes.
Or write in on your
Yes.
notes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's great.
Thank you.
You
That's a
never
good-
really expected the council to follow.
No,
the
no.
rules, did you?
That's why we wanted to make them big and with enough space, but not too much space. For
You can have this much freedom.
Yeah. Thank you for that
Thank you.
clarification.
No, thank you for clarification.
So I think we covered this area pretty well. Perhaps the only thing that I didn't mention clearly enough is that the more transfer and processing card talks about both Metro building facilities to accept food organics from haulers, that's the transfer side. But Metro Council could also consider building facilities that process organics into compost or building anaerobic digesters to process the organic waste collected. Next slide, please. The community drop-off depots policy area focuses on residential and business self-haul customers. It is intended to capture facilities where the public, construction contractors, and other similar businesses can drop off materials like items for reuse, for recycling, including materials covered under the Recycling Modernization Act, yard debris, clean wood, household hazardous waste, and garbage, including large household items that cannot be recycled or reused. Under the status quo, Metro would continue accepting recycling, household hazardous waste, and garbage from residential and business self-haul customers at both Central and South transfer stations. And as we mentioned during the briefings, there is currently no space to have a major area for accepting items for reuse. Under the no depots at Metro facilities option, the region would rely on the private sector alone to provide services instead of Metro Central and Metro South. On the opposite end, Metro could build more community drop-off depots, and this could include a facility on the Cornelia site and more facilities in other parts of the region. Okay, and now the final policy area is a special area where you can choose more than one card, although we amended the organics section. The final policy area for discussion is reuse and repair. And this area spans investment in Metro facilities and direct investments in nonprofit organizations and businesses. This area captures some of the most preferred elements by stakeholders from the no-build and full-service scenarios. The reuse and repair choice is the only policy area in this activity that allows for selecting more than just a single option, and this is because the options on each end of the spectrum are not mutually exclusive. Under the status quo option, Metro would not accept items for reuse at transfer stations. Metro would also continue to provide funding to the reuse and repair sector through grant programs like the Investment and Innovation Grants Program if council decides to renew it. An option in one extreme is for Metro to provide dedicated and ongoing financial support to reuse and repair nonprofits and businesses. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the option Metro builds facilities. Under this option, Metro would build new facilities or lease existing ones to establish a reuse warehouse, a reuse mall, or both. and Metro would design, build, and operate these facilities in partnership with with reuse organizations. Now I will hand it back to Maria Elena.
Thank you, Luis. So here's what we're going to do next. We'll create some space for clarifying questions. And then we're going to do a round and ask each of you to share your policy preferences. And I'm going to ask you to come up to the board. We'll give you more instruction in a minute. And then once we map where you all are, then we'll have a discussion about trade-offs and impacts and get conversation going. Okay. Are there any more clarifying questions? Okay, great. So let's get a pulse of your like, so where you all are. Okay, next slide, please.
Bring that back up.
So we're going to ask each of you to, yeah, there you go. Thank you. We're going to ask each council member to come to the board one at a time and express your preferences using your personalized cards. Luis and Esty will be up here and they'll help you put the cards where you want to go. I have a mic here so that you're able to share your preferences. And the assumption is that you selected, as President Peterson noted, there's extremes here. And so any place in there, where if you've identified someplace in between, we'd love to hear what that is as you place your card. And then once everybody's cards are mapped, we'll sort of take a look at where we are. Any questions before we start?
Yeah.
So who'd like to kick off the fun and come up to the board with their policy preferences?
Feeling bold.
Go after you if you go first.
I'll go first.
Come on, Councilor Gonzalez, come on down.
So do I go up there?
Yeah, come on.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So what waste tonnage flow is the first one? Or is it?
You can go through all your cards.
Oh,
Okay?
through all of them?
Yeah, go
Oh,
get
you
your
do.
cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah.
I feel a filibuster coming on.
Too soon. Easy joke.
All right, gonna give you the mic. The board is yours.
All right, great. Yeah, I'll try and go through these pretty quickly. I think there's a common thread with what I was thinking about, but for the first one, the blue wet waste tonnage flow, I put no guarantee for Metro. And actually, let me read real quick. So some of the things that that I was thinking about is like through a lens of like a specialization is that thinking about Metro focusing in the areas that we could bring the greatest value. And in general, my personal philosophy is that government excels where there might not be as much of an incentive for the private sector, the private markets to deliver services for communities. So I think one is embracing our role as a regulator and finding ways to bring that. But under this, I have a really big caveat under the no guarantee, because one of my biggest measures about this kind of guarantee shift is we need strong measures against consolidation, because capital and especially folks with a lot of capital, it's just a big worry that I have around the hybrid system and the kind of players that we want to continue to support, having a diverse sector. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us as we reevaluate that to either add fees, grow some of the fees that we have to deliver some of those services that we like. And for private facility regulation, I liked on the individual tabs that we were given before, I really liked the bullet points under keep existing regulation and increase Metro regulation, specifically because the things that stood out to me were, I think that even if Metro was to decline its guarantee, I do think that the tonnage allocation model is something that we should keep and use to incentivize the outcomes that we want. I think it's very important for us to have a conversation about regulating rates across all aspects that we have influence over. And then really like the aspect of the minimum service level. In terms of the organics, if I should keep going through across the board, In terms of organics, I felt like, again, this area of where are the partnerships for Metro to make the greatest impact, and everything from supporting green jobs pathways or supporting new industries that can scale from Oregon and beyond is something that I think that we should have more transfer and processing that is overseen by Metro. I think we've brought up the Cornelius site as an opportunity for, I think the Cornelius site is a great opportunity for us to start to park a lot of these other aspects in community drop off and reuse repair, which is a common theme, as well as at our public sites. And also I at one of our briefings a week or two ago, I mentioned that, there are also ways that I want to understand exactly how private programs that have come up. For example, I gave the example in one of our briefings about the Purple Bin program in Washington County, which was like a different level of services that came up, and my own personal experience with how difficult that's been, and wondering if it's actually helping us meet our goals. So I think that's an important role for Metro to have a larger role in organics and in areas where we can specialize that might not be the bread and butter of everyone else. In terms of the community transfer stations, I did put the no haulers at Metro facilities, and I just want to explain my thoughts around that. I have here Metro transitions to more of a retail model that prioritizes services for individuals and households. We repurpose our sites from the commercial traffic to really incentivizing organics, the reuse one-stop shop mall, the household hazardous waste, services that really serve people in a much more intimate manner. For the community drop-off depots, I definitely think that Metro has a big role to play here. I have in big words here, bringing services to the people, and this is an area where we can help again with workforce, enterprise investment, with the different resources that we have at our disposal. And just from my personal experience, I think this is an area where philanthropy, government, nonprofit, and the private sector can really lead the way for us. And then lastly, reuse and repair, increase funding. Again, a common theme for bringing resources to community around the values that I've shared and that I see reflected. And I just have here, I think this is our greatest area of opportunity, and something that I know this council is also really focused on figuring out how we increase investment here. So, yeah.
Great job, thank you. Who'd like to come next? Is that you? Okay, let me give you the mic and the board is yours.
You did it. I'm just gonna hand these to you. They're still in their thing. So I am doing the Metro Guaranteed 40%. For me, it's important that there's a guarantee of tonnage, a number less than 50%. For me, the 40% number is something I'm less wedded to. I'm so happy to examine, what is the difference between 38 and 42? Not a lot. And I think it's important that we shift our perspective, because that 40% number was arrived on with the philosophy of the amount needed to repay bonds for these aged facilities. And it's now important that we think about that investment as underwriting our program, and would really like to see us examine what does 40% mean in this modern context. So maybe it's not 40%, maybe it's 30%. But for me, a number that is guaranteed enables us to make sure that, yes, we are still competing, because that competition is important, but we are not in the race to lowest common denominator. And instead, we're going to still do our workforce investments that raise standards for the whole industry. Brown? I didn't write anything. Increased regulation. So then getting ahead to the orange, I wrote down more Metro transfer stations And for me, paramount is to address the concern at South and that we need to either split, supplement, or relocate. And then I don't want a full relocation. I guess I should just be on record that what we have at South is pretty magical. It's, we've outgrown it, but it's really a community asset that we should find a way to grow around and supplement. And then number 2 is we need to do something to address the lack of services in Washington County. So like my colleague, Counselor Simpson, I thought that some of the red was confusing because I saw elements of one card embedded in another. And for me, I chose to write on the card for more transfer and processing. And to me, that's about investing in the facilities that we already have a footprint for. So South and Central need investment. They need those depackagers, all that stuff. And that's where we should be focusing for investment. But then we can and should include private investment. And then for green, depots everywhere, lots of materials. Leverage recycling modernization, don't duplicate sites, supplement. Depots everywhere. And then I used both of my blue cards for increasing funding, regular and ongoing funding, using tonnage as well as material and geographic targets for investment. And Metro build out facilities. I think a reuse hub, mall, collaborative space is important. That's a space. And we are not going to fully publicize the work. We want the nonprofits to be doing the work in that space. Or for-profits, innovative for-profits, good too.
Nice. Thank you. Great. Oh. I
won't be very long.
I thought I wouldn't say anything.
Listen. We're gonna figure it all out, right?
Any ideas around?
All right. I'm gonna let the people on the board deliberate.
No,
Y'all
it's
good?
on.
Y'all good?
Yours.
Y'all
Yeah,
ready?
all
All
yours.
right. So on the first, I decided to go with no guarantee for Metro. And it kind of moves us out of this space of competing and regulating. And I think that that has been our big hangup, is trying to figure ourselves out. But I also put in a couple of caveats. So I'd like to understand the cons of that. And I think Councilor Gonzalez started talking about that in terms of consolidation of the system. But then also, if we're not competing, what does the phase down of our tonnage and the equitable redistribution look like amongst the system? And then a continued conversation with our own internal Metro staff that work at those transfer stations, and what that transition looks like. So I'm just gonna say increased Metro regulation with that because of all the things I just said. I think if you don't have that, then you have a system that can just go haywire. Let's see, commercial transfer stations. So the public must maintain access. I really believe that we have to maintain South and Central for our local haulers, and plus of the geographic locations in which they serve folks. I mean, I don't have a place to take my household hazardous waste if I don't go to Metro North, just based out of where I live in East County. So, and this is me personally. Same little kerfuddle we had with the 2 red cards under organics. I'm supportive of really moving this into private with Metro funding. And also, I think a couple of things I thought about in terms of the second piece, more transfer and processing stations, the site location and readiness. But also, I think this is a space where Metro can lean into our public-private partnerships and strengthen partnerships across the board around that. Let's see. I just said maintain central and south. Again, with these depots, the public, I don't like giving public options and then taking them away. And I think we need to continue to have that. And then I put for this one 2 cards, Metro builds facilities as needed in partnership with reuse orgs and our private facilities. And I'm supportive of this because we also need to invest in the reuse network that is trying to create itself and its footprint. And I said footprint in quotes. So there y'all go. Counselor.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I join those who say no guarantee for Metro in waste tonnage. But I think it's important for us to focus, if we're looking at long-term planning for solid waste system, our facilities as well as the system at large, that we do keep in mind a priority that almost every one of us mentioned, which is reduction of landfill waste. Today, we have transfer station capacity for twice as much waste as the region is producing. And we want to lower the amount we're wasting. So we have to think, if we're going to be conscious of the investments Metro and our private partners have made in the system, we have to be mindful of an orderly transition to using half or less of a capacity that's already too much. I'll say a few more words about that in the commercial transfer stations. Hey, we're a team here on regulation because I'm in favor of increased regulation as well. I don't think that necessarily includes rates, though. The original cards that were handed out was we increase regulation and we regulate rates. I think there is a way to use rate regulation as an alternative if we don't succeed through regulation of operations in turning the corner and starting to reduce landfill waste. So increase service requirements, maybe require alliances between private transfer stations and reuse facilities, maybe require that private transfer stations sponsor neighborhood pickup events and things like that. And if collectively that regulation doesn't get us where we want to be on the landfill waste curve, then we look at rate regulation. So my visual learner came out in the orange area, and you won't be able to see my graph. I didn't write words here. Well, I wrote a few words, but mostly it's a graph. And essentially it gets to the point I said earlier, which is we've got 200% capacity, 100% of garbage. We can debate what level we want that 100% of landfill garbage to get down to, but let's say 35% of what it is today. Then we have to reduce 200% of capacity down to the same 35% or thereabouts, so that there's not waste and cost in the system. All you wizards, I'm sure you're smart enough all together to figure out how to get us there, but this is over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years, probably 15 to 20 years. Organics, all private with Metro funding, could include, this plays a little off of Councilor Gonzalez's notion of transitioning South and Central into more retail oriented facilities. So this all private processing of organics could include Metro contracting with private sector or nonprofits to operate organic processing on Metro properties if they're no longer, to the extent that they are reducing the load of what they're taking, either by reducing the 40% of wet waste or diverting commercial haulers to private transfer stations. It's I used two cards here too because I felt a little trapped. Because the original cards talked about household garbage, household hazardous waste, and one more thing, recycling. Thank you. And I don't think they all have to be lumped together. In fact, I think household garbage, possibly accepting bulky waste, can be treated differently and could be, for example, Metro could provide incentives, subsidies, or mandates for curbside collection throughout the region, anywhere that it's available, rather than impose a cost to subsidize lots of individual cars going to our transfer stations or private transfer stations. Find a way to have it collected at the street, at the curb. But I don't think that's an appropriate reaction, clearly not for hazardous waste. So I would say for hazardous waste, continue to maintain some kind of operation, whether Metro runs it or someone else under contract to Metro, kind of like what we do with Recology already, operates it at our facilities. Those both go. Those both go. And for reuse and repair, I'm with Metro increases. And I added a descriptor or limiter that we commit to increasing catalyst funding. I'm not convinced that once a robust reuse and recycling program operated mostly by private or for-profit companies takes hold, I'm not convinced that we have to make a commitment to permanent subsidizing. Either regulations or other incentives could help with that.
Thank you. Would you like to go next?
Give Councilor President Peterson an opportunity.
Say that again? President Peterson, would you like to go next?
Yes, he knows I always
She
She's-
wants to, but she gets to go
She's
sooner.
passing to you. Yeah.
All right. I don't think I have much to add, but I'll go with wet waste tonnage. I think I'll go with the no guarantee because I don't think it'll drop to zero. A lot of it's limited by the location and Metro and South. I do have to point out that Metro and South are not the same. They have different potentials, different problems. And so sometimes when we talk about maintain Central and South, they can have different trajectories. Keep existing regulations. Regulations are not static and there's different kinds of regulations. I guess the question is, do we go to a fully regulated system, a predominantly market-driven system, or a hybrid system? I think we have a hybrid system, and I think we probably maintain that. So I guess that's closer to the status quo, but realizing that we will be, as we transition, we'll be having more regulations on different things. For example, we may have regulations on who operates certain facilities. Maintain Central and South. South needs more consideration than Central. Central can do more food waste processing, which you really can't do very effectively at South because of the limitations. So I guess that would be, I'll put it on maintain Central and South. There may be some limitations on haulers at South that do not apply at Central. More transfer and processing. Again, that's going to be a hybrid system. This is for organics. The only note I have is going to be a hybrid system. There's going to be some subsidies. And I think we can provide some subsidies for organics because it is not a high priority. It's like individual haul. It's not very profitable, so we have to step in and provide some additional support. More community depots. More community depots. I don't know. You're gonna put it up. I just said yes. And Metro keeps a limited role on reuse and repair. I guess I'll go with the private because the private is better at sleuthing out where the markets are and how the markets can adapt. That would require a whole separate attitude that we have. But on the other hand, we have to provide some stimulus for it. So I will support that. And that would be I think that would be
The increases funding.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
No guarantee for Metro, but it's not that. Phased reduction in Metro allocation over time based on constraints of existing contracts, and we retain allocation authority. So it's not what the title says. Increased Metro regulation on private facility. But also in that, I want to put this up on the franchise model. I think it's a new concept for council. I don't think I totally understand its impacts and how it relates to any of the other policies. It's just this thing that was kind of new to all of us, and I don't want to lose the conversation, but I have no idea what it means. No haulers at Metro facilities. I interpreted this as related to the wet waste tonnage decrease. I'm not sure if I interpreted that correct. Is that correct? So the reason I put no haulers at Metro facilities is because I interpreted it as if I want to get wet waste down over time, that we would be slowly decreasing their use. Right, okay. Okay. Organics. At this point, I would land with all private with Metro funding, but I'm not convinced I understand enough about what's going on right now. Again, this is all back to what Metro's role should be for me in the bigger scheme of things at the end of the day, 15, 20 years from now, not necessarily today, but I don't totally understand what's going on and why, while the privates are trying to grow, we're trying to grow. I don't understand that yet. The community drop-off depots, a partnership may or may not mean maintaining the two, but more community drop-offs. I don't know where to go with that. I think we want more of it, but I don't know where our role is yet. And then, sorry, I should put my glasses on. Reuse and repair. I said limited role, but what I meant by that is our partnerships will define our role. Because if we're trying to find where our role is, I'm hesitant to say exactly where that is. I don't understand all of the partnerships that we could potentially have. It's definitely a change in what we're doing, but yeah, there you go. I'm not abstaining, but I am weirdly close to not understanding where all these markets are. You guys know more about that, but I think if you just use the rubric of we're trying to define the gaps in the private system, that's where I would land. And if suddenly the private system comes up, then how do we remove ourselves? Not compete, not take it over. Like, we have to figure out how we are flexible over time. And I think that's what is most important to me.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask a clarification question to Councilor Rosenthal just for the record? Did you choose 2 cars for the reuse and repair area, or you're going with 1 and we keep your notes together?
You can just go with 1.
Okay. Because you had the Metro keeps limited role, but you pointed towards the other one, right?
I'm sorry, I can't understand your question.
The notes that you have here, should we combine them with the car that you chose? So that we have the notes, or you can think about it too, because.
Well, it's gonna always be a limited role to some extent.
Okay,
So,
got it.
I mean, we're not gonna take it over entirely,
Okay,
but we are gonna provide more funding. You can.
yeah, so if it's okay with you, I would combine the 2 and put them with the other one so that we keep those notes and we don't lose them for the record.
Thank you. Thank you for being so well prepared. What we'd like to do is to just give you a few minutes of reflection and then also give you a break before the discussion. So feel free to come up to the board and take a look at where are the areas of alignment, where are the areas of difference. When we come back from a break, we'll have a discussion about trade-offs and impacts only on the areas where there's like difference. So if you're in general alignment, we'll kind of leave that and then really move to discuss the areas of difference, understands the impacts and trade-offs, ask more questions, and then see if any of those areas of difference come a little closer to alignment. Does that sound like a plan? So let's take a 10-minute break. So come back at like 5 minutes to. Oh my God,
So
did you
who
make
is
it
going
hard?
I don't even.
Thank you. Everybody back? Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move into discussion. What we've done here, we've divided the board into two areas. There's general agreement on wet waste, lots to discuss, but general alignment on wet waste tonnage flow, commercial transfer stations, and private facility regulation. So the conversation that we're gonna go into now is really more about community drop-off depots, reuse and repair, and organics. This is not the last time you're going to have this conversation, but for today, really talking about the areas of difference, understanding trade-offs and impacts, getting clarification on sort of some of your intentions when you placed your card. And then we'll see if that moves anyone a little closer, because maybe you've got enough information and you can come closer to alignment. So I'm going to ask Marta to co-facilitate with me, and we're going to bring in different folks to help us with that. Who's up first on reuse and repair?
Yeah, we brought up our boards from the symposium, and we wanted to bring it back to that because we heard a lot from our stakeholders, and we're just reminding of sort of where we landed. So on reuse and repair, we heard a lot of support for Metro increases funding. And I think that is about increasing funding to nonprofits, existing nonprofits, maybe some for-profits, but I think in our scenarios, it was around increasing funding to do more reuse work and divert more materials from a landfill, the good work that these organizations are already doing. So there was really a lot of support for that, and just wanted to remind that actually was an element of the no build scenario, which had the concept is that Metro would have some sort of competitive funding through an RFP put out and asking existing nonprofits to align with or respond to the RFP for how they would reduce waste going from landfill, how they would separate more in terms of more materials. And so this one seems like there's a lot of support. I'm looking at some of the details, or if folks want to speak to that a little bit more about does that sound right? Like that is there general, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Although Councilor Rosenthal, you had 2 here.
Just one, so we combine the notes. So there's one card.
Okay, 1 card.
I just wanted to keep the notes.
Right, okay, right. Because then he also had limited role. So I want to stop here. So are there questions about how we might increase funding? Yes.
So I guess for this side of the equation that we're talking about.
Yep.
Whether it's reuse and repair, organics, or community drop off, the reason I was kind of like, what is our role is because I don't know what outcomes, like what is the target that we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to get to 50% of all organics or 100%, I'm just making numbers up, 100% of all reuse and repair?
I think it's the highest that we can get, and we don't have a lot of data around this at this point.
What are we striving for? And then what is the combination of things that need to happen now versus in the future? Because we're right in the middle of like a transition in implementing state law. And I don't know if I have a complete understanding of what that means for our role, right? So what is I don't think we've been clear about, yes, we want community drop-off depots, and from we want more to we want as many as we can possibly get, but what does that mean? Like, is that an access-driven measure then? That means we need 10 if there's, everybody needs to have one within 15 minutes. I don't know what that goal is in order to be able to say what our role is. And I just wanted to clarify that because I don't understand the outcomes we're trying to get to. I think we're all in agreement that we need to do more in this space. I just don't know what that means.
That's a great question, and you answered it in your question, and that it is an access-driven factor. You all have maps in front of you, and as a part of the gap analysis, when we look at the system, it is about access and about having the necessary infrastructure to be able to move those materials efficiently. So for all 3 of those areas, we have existing gaps that lead to lack of access. And when we look at the board, one of the primary things across the counselors' values and priorities is around geographic access to services.
Yes. Access increases use. Where is the tipping point at which we say this is enough access, and it becomes unaffordable to normal people to have that much access, to have a regional waste fee that's like giant? Like, how do we size the system, and what is Metro, and what is that is my question on this entire side of the equation.
After you answer that, I
20, go ahead, Luis.
Yes, I think if I understand correctly, that is a little bit of what we did in the cost modeling for the scenarios, and because we proposed specific number of facilities as alternatives, right? So we were trying to do a little bit of both, and I feel like that's why we are pausing now to talk about the high level policy, because we were getting too much into the details. But I feel like now,
I'm just saying to
yeah.
you that today I can't tell.
You know, yes, that's what I'm saying. So we can come back to you and say, if we maintain Central and South only, then access remains at X%. If we add 3 more, then access increases by X%. And then bring other, the cost measures associated with that.
Access, yes, but I want to know how much more are we able to bring in or divert, right?
In terms of tons.
Right.
From the system.
Yes.
In my little brain, I'm gonna be more outcome based than it is. It Metro's role, or is it the private? We want to achieve the outcome. And
Right.
We have heard from our reuse partners that they want Metro to play a role in assisting them to do more of the work that they do in diversion of materials. So, I mean, that's been loud and clear, and they're already doing the good work, but they need more to do more. I also, can I just say, with the Recycling Modernization Act, we know that we need 43 new depots, not all, in different parts of the region to fulfill that. And so we believe that if we were to move forward with some of the community depots, that could fulfill collecting some RMA materials as well as some reusable materials. So that also is just a marker of how DEQ has looked at the region and what the needs are for material collection. Marianne, do you want to call on? Yeah.
I want us to talk about the measurement of access. President Peterson, you talked about everybody should be within X minutes. Another way to look at it is that we should have one facility, however you define that facility, for every X thousands of people, for every 50,000 people. If we do it that everyone needs to be within a certain time of a facility, we are inherently subsidizing sprawl. Because if your landscape is half-acre minimum lots, then for every one of those who are spread out to be within 10 minutes, you have a lot fewer households being served by each depot. And the system then, if the rates are equal, is subsidizing that low density. I think that's, from my perspective, that's contrary to our climate smart goals. I think access is important, but I would really encourage us to define it as a facility per X 10,000 people.
I think I understand that, and I think when we looked at the distributed and the full service scenario, we did some of the calculations because it is an issue that Councilor Rosenthal also brought up earlier. And so we can do both and look at those in combination. Driving times, as you're correct to point out, that density affects, also congestion affects. That's where we went with driving times. And so to highlight the differences, for example, between Central and South. South is right off the freeway, and that increases access measured by driving times by a lot more than Central, which is tucked away in an industrial area that takes a long time. So there's different factors. I think we can look at both. And I don't know, Lindsay, you have the calculations that we did? Yes, please, because we did have, in the distributed scenario, we did some quick calculations of how many thousands of people per council district would be per, how do we do it? I mean, let's
This
do it.
council district has roughly the same number of
Exactly,
people.
yeah,
Right.
So if we were to approach it from a
exactly.
number of facilities per 10,000 or 50,000, there should be approximately the same number of facilities in each district.
So this is the modeling that we did based on the baseline, the no build, and the distributed and full service. So for baseline recycling centers, there's currently 1 per 240,000 people. There's none in District 1 or 6. And if we kept at this pace by 2045, which is the modeling year, there would be 1 per 275,000 people. Those are the recycling centers or the depots that we're talking about now. For the full service, in the year 2045, there would be 1 per every 200,000 people. For distributed, there would be 1 per 184,000 people. And every district would have at least 1. And then in the no build, there would be 1 per 240,000, and there would be all districts except District 6 would have at least 1 for that model.
Great. Is that on one piece of paper that you could send me? I can't keep.
Yeah.
it.
I would be
Yeah.
happy. We
I
would
love
be happy.
numbers, but I can't
Yes,
keep that many.
absolutely.
Great, thanks. I'm glad you did that.
And it was only to give you an idea that we were talking in terms of hundreds of thousands of people per when we were doing the modeling for
Right.
those scenarios. So we weren't going down to the 1 per 50,000 or 20,000. That would require double the number of facilities that we proposed.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis, did you have your hand up before?
I did raise my hand and then I did the online, I don't know.
I wanted to give the two of you space, Councilor Simpson as well. You were on the other end of this discussion, and so if you'd like to share any observations.
My response to being with that card put in public, I think it is the role of that card to show that the public can provide a container or a backbone for a system, because otherwise reuse is just a scatter shot, whatever can get funded in the moment, and it goes in ebbs and flows, and actually there's a perverse cycle that when we need it the most, it's the least resource. So I think that's why I'm saying giving it a public container is important, but public employees won't be doing the work. It'll be the partner groups who are doing the reuse, processing and distribution and collection and cleaning and all that.
Thank you for that clarification. And can I ask a follow-up question for counselors that put the Metro increases funding? So were you thinking along those lines as well, both some structure of public-private partnerships as well as direct funding to organizations, or were those two separate preferences?
Councilor Gonzalez.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be mindful. Yeah, I completely agree with Councilor Lewis on that front. I think the role and I tried to create that through line of our role as a regulator, as a role of the benchmarks for the system. And then we have all these other tools that we deploy, whether it's rates, whether it's tonnage fees, whether it's to then help us get to that level. And kind of going back to one of the comments that President Peterson made earlier, is that as we're evaluating these new depots and these new sites that we want to bring on board, it didn't necessarily come up in one of the bullet points here. I don't think Metro doesn't have to be the owner of all of those sites. We can help facilitate the sites, either with nonprofits or the private sector, and then set that minimum level of service, which I know was in the brown card. And I think that to me feels like the sweet spot right now, knowing obviously it's a resource constrained environment. And there's a good point that Councilor Lewis made earlier too about, the 40% helps us underwrite the system as it is now. So changing that allocation to Metro would, change things. And we need to figure out how to do that. But that being said, I still think that that leaning into that direction would be really beneficial for us.
Councilor Nolan?
I like that idea. I also think, I would suggest that we think of this not just as facilities and where they go and who owns them, but we put some concentrated effort into rebranding what it is that Metro does in this space. And I'm off the top of my head, wordsmiths can do better than this, but I think we need to move to a place where our role is to assure a clean, safe, climate-friendly, neighborhood-friendly system for disposing of waste, whatever we want to call it. As if we succeed in moving the total tonnage of wet waste down, people, particularly households, are now paying essentially per ton, per can. And as that waste goes down, revenues per ton, absent increases, will go up. To achieve what we're talking about here in reuse and repair, we want to be the orchestrator of redirecting that investment that the public is now making in a clean environment, absent garbage, into reuse and repair subsidies. So in my mind, I'm not thinking about, well, we're going to keep doing everything we're doing now, and in addition, raise the regional services fee, double it in order to pay for subsidies here. If we're thinking 15, 20 years out, it's the mix of how much the public is spending to send stuff to landfills and how much in lieu of that it starts to spend in reducing, recycling, reusing. So maybe it just increases with inflation over time, but the mix of where those investments are being used, what services they're being used, changes to heavily on reuse, reduce, recycle, instead of throw trash in the landfill.
Councilor Simpson, I'd like to invite you into the conversation since you were the other voice down below here. It seems like there's a little bit more alignment that was obvious when we first started, and just want to see where you are at.
Absolutely. I had two. So I had one in the private spot as well, because I'm along the same lines as my colleagues, especially with Councilor Lewis, around like having that core, that connection piece in terms of like bringing that network together. Because I see our role in creating this new system. Like we said, it doesn't exist, and it's kind of a patchwork. And so, and to Councilor Nolan's point, I think we will need to invest on the recycling end, but I think I can't remember my note on the public side. I think build is needed on the larger, yeah, with partnerships, because that's how we move forward, is with those key partnerships and building and site development, making sure there's access abroad, from a general sense. But that's where my mind went on the public side, but super supportive of like those organizations, nonprofits, businesses already doing the work, and they just need that kind of like boost so that we can get to this 15, 20-year vision that we're trying to get to. That's where my mind is at.
Thank you.
So, oh, sorry, Councilor.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I was going to summarize this area, so please go.
No, if you were going to comment on what he said, I'll wait.
Is your comment on reuse and repair?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Please,
Yeah, generally, I mean, I agree with a lot of the comments that I've heard so far, particularly of Councilor Lewis and Councilor Gonzalez. And I agree with the comments that Councilor Nolan made regarding we have to be careful about the density issue and not encouraging sprawl. We have plenty of dense areas where we don't have service. And so I think there's a lot to work on. My point, I think, is really twofold. One is we have an ersatz piecemeal system right now, and I think this is what Counselor Simpson just pointed out, and we don't really have a complete system. So until we actually come up with a concept for what a complete system is going to look like and start working toward that, it's really going to be hard for us to set, concrete goals on how much we can achieve. We don't have these kinds of facilities available. So I think we have to learn to walk before we can run in this case. And I think we have a lot to do in that regard. And in that regard, I would also point out that solid waste is generated by the people that live here. And so the education component of getting the populace, the entire community, many communities, both public and private, on board and informing them as to what they can do and how much they are a participant is going to be necessary, both for controlling the waste and getting them involved, as well as funding whatever additional costs is going to be necessary in the future, because the more waste we generate, the more population we have, the more costs we're going to incur in controlling this. It's just not, it's not a freebie. For example, we may want to build composite centers, and we haven't done that yet. We don't know how much it's going to cost or exactly how to implement it, but we have to start someplace.
Thank you for that comment. So let me go ahead and summarize the reuse and repair area, and please let me know if I get this right. Our desire is to walk away with this with direction to develop a proposed set of investments. So what I'm hearing from counselors is alignment on increased funding and investment in the area of reuse and repair. There is an emphasis on public-private partnerships. So our next steps would be to bring back a set of investments under this guidance that will outline the specific costs, impacts, and outcomes. I'm seeing head nods.
Can I just
Yeah,
add a little asterisk to that? I think
absolutely.
for all of this right side of the equation of where the council really wants to put more time and energy into, just going back to the education portion of this, the branding side of it, like a real sustained effort throughout time to I'm probably harkening back to glory days now, but I still know the Metro Hot.
234-3000.
Yeah, the jingle. There was a jingle, and we need to get that back in folks' heads, right? I think they know to call us generally, but they don't know the ebbs and flows of what can be recycled and where they can take something. Like, just as a collective, I would rather not have 20 different organizations out there advertising. Some sort of centralized way to make sure that we continue the hotline, but we also continue an education of what can you do to help, right? TriMet's old slogan was how we get there matters. I miss that slogan. But if we could start thinking about, again, increasing people's culture, the culture that we created back when.
Yeah.
Right? Of like, this is part of who we are. I mean, who was it that, Mayor Stovall, when he travels, he brings back his recycling. That speaks
volume.
That speaks to that culture of, right? We are committed to this. We don't know how it works in another space, so we're just going to bring it back because
it doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right to throw it in the trash.
Absolutely. Right. No. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I will include that.
Wait, are we ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah, so I think moving on to community depots would be the next area. And one thing to highlight before we jump into that is, we mentioned this in the briefings, is when we think about community depots, this is really reflective of what we heard in the stakeholder input around separating uses between when you have commercial hauling trucks going through a facility and residential or small businesses taking their garbage to drop off, their recycling to drop off, and household hazardous waste. So that's what this category is really about. And so I'm going to ask Esty if she can walk through some of the comments there and then tie it to the specific scenarios and what those investments look like on the ground, again, with the goal of coming out of this conversation with maybe one or two specific areas under these categories that we could develop a set of proposed investments.
Thanks. Okay, so I think, there's three folks that said more community depots pretty strongly, and this really does align with the small to mid-sized network of facilities that was in the distributed scenario. I think that, there's also 3 that said maintain depots at Metro Central and South. And I think this does, it interplays with what happens for commercial transfer stations, right? And that what Marta just said about separating uses. And so the question is, can we continue to do both wet waste and community collection of recycling, excuse me, HHW and reuse materials at these existing Central and South? So the comments here were under these were partnership may or may not mean maintaining more community drop-offs, partner for recycling and household hazardous waste, and the public needs to continue to have this service, I think. And then also there's one part here where it seems like it's, Councilor Nolan, you thought requiring more on the private side to provide community depot services. Because you said no depots at Metro facilities. Right. So I think we're a little split here. I do think there's some interplay between. Yes.
Self-haul garbage and household hazardous waste.
Okay.
And bulky waste recycling.
Right. So you're talking about incentives for more collection of household garbage at curbside versus at facilities. And that's that was
The
important.
incentives or subsidies or a mandate
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on local governments.
Mm-hmm. I would ask for those of you who put maintain Central and South for community drop-off depots, just your thoughts about, or questions that you might have or what brought you there. If there's anyone that wants to say more. And I think this interplays with what's decided to do with Central and South as commercial transfer stations. So they're intertwined, really. So any thoughts or questions? Mm-hmm.
This is where the headings don't mean anything, right? I mean, you can group with the heading, but it's like the intent is to get more community drop-off depots.
Okay.
I just don't know, because I'm not an expert and have not run the scenarios and don't know all the details that you do to say exactly what happens with North and with Central and South.
Okay.
And so it's not about, that's a level of detail that I can't give you right now. But my point was keep them until we know we don't need them, or we make a different decision. That's not a level of detail.
That's great. And that's what we do want to bring back to you next. Some ideas about how those things can interplay and what they could look like. Yes, Councilor Rules.
Yeah, and I think I might be stuck here. I mean, I'm obviously on the extreme end because I'm looking at this through the user journey and not through the product journey. And the user journey for me of going to South just was something to drop off, say styrofoam before that partnership ended, or like a couple pieces of raw wood. That doesn't feel like the user journey I want for those materials. So I get that like the status quo is kind of checking the box right now for the materials, but it's not for the person.
I think the idea of these community drop-off depots would be for a lot of materials, including reuse and recycling and HHW. So more of the one-stop shop. That is the idea here.
So it sounds like that there is support for additional community depots in the region. Looking at what the set of investments would look like, but within that, we need to answer how does this fit within the existing system and needs as we bring forward those set of investments, particularly as it relates to South and Central.
Councilor Gonzalez had something. He also is one on the outliner, so I just love to call on you.
No, yeah, for sure. Thank you. Marta, I recognize you were starting to summarize, but I was like, oh, I wanted to make sure I talked about because Esty highlighted the kind of the status quo one and the private, but we hadn't talked about the more cards yet. And I just wanted to add that I felt really compelled to put mine in that because of just the basic geographic inequity right now with Washington County and the fact that we don't have a public transfer, a public site, or that we've acquired a site. And I just wanted to kind of continue to elevate that when I saw this, it's not just the other depots that we're talking about, but I was thinking particularly about the Cornelius site and the opportunity that lies there. And I just wanted to emphasize that before we moved on from the green section.
No, so I'm including that in there, in this, when we think about the existing system, where we see the most extreme gaps, particularly as it relates to household hazardous waste, is on the west side and the east side. And that's also an area, based on the interviews that we did with stakeholders, that private industry is least interested in getting engaged in, because it's expensive and it's a challenging material to manage. So within this set, what I am taking away is that this would also include, when we think about more depots, addressing the existing gaps in the system and what that set of investments would look like. Yes, I've seen head nods. Great.
Any other commentary before we move to organics?
I think before we move to organics, there's another point that I don't think it fit into, maybe it's around policy, but there's this theme that we've talked about briefly about like recycling markets in general and what's sustainable and what's resilient. And I think an emphasis, and I know that this happens at Metro, but just kind of pulling it up around coordinating with other major regions across the Pacific coast to help determine, like, one is it's not just looking within our region to see what's feasible, because we're a pretty small region when it comes to scale of these things. So I think there is an element of responding to that, like making a bigger market across the West Coast where there is that value alignment, because a lot of these items will be very difficult to cost manage and might never be profitable to manage. But as a community, we've acknowledged that we do not want them to go into the waste stream, and that's okay. Kind of flipping that, the lens of the incentives there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, didn't know where else to put it.
Okay, thanks. Let's move to organics.
So I can summarize what I see, and then people can correct me or add, edit. So what I see, first of all, is no status quo. So it seems like there is agreement to move away from the status quo. I think there is an interplay between, and there's more cars on the more transfer and processing side. So for Metro to play a more active role in the organics sector, but not necessarily as the operator of all the facilities in the system. And I think Councilor Simpson brought up the issue that the options are not mutually exclusive. Metro can use Central, for example, as an organics hub, which was proposed in the distributed scenario actually, and but also then look for partnerships with the private sector to fill the gaps for organics transfer and processing in the region. So what I always I work with examples better, and that's sometimes risky, but for example, if there is a gap in District X, look for partnerships there first. If there are no gaps, then Metro steps in. That's kind of what I understood from the general conversation about using the existing capacity that we have in the system for the waste streams that need it the most. So it's a combination of what I heard in other areas and the organics area. I don't know if that helps or that makes it worse, that summary. And so if there are no comments, what I would propose is that staff can bring a proposal or a flavor, maybe a couple of different flavors of how can we use Central, perhaps South, for processing more organics, and then what can we do in terms of partnerships with the private sector to increase access in the areas where there are no Metro facilities.
President Peterson.
I'm struggling with this only from the standpoint of why it has taken us so long to get into it.
Organics.
Right, and why we think that's a role that we should play when the privates are now moving faster than we are. And I don't know if it's because we've taken a pause, right, as the council, and so staff has taken a pause, but it feels like this has been something that we've been trying to get into for a very long time. and stumbled over certain things. I'm needing clarification on if the private sector is moving, why do we need to get into it?
I don't.
And maybe it's to the good point, I'm sorry,
Oh, no.
of having a stable system through the ebbs and flows. I don't know. I don't have a clear picture.
I mean, I think it's multi-layered why it's taken a long time to get food waste out of the waste stream. I know we've been working on it for quite a long time. There were the most recent policy adoption pre-COVID, it had multiple layers that we were working on, both from a policy angle, like focusing on the generator and getting food waste to be separated for recycling. But in addition to doing that, we also needed to build the other components of the system, which is stable markets and transfer and processing capacity. And both of those areas have taken longer to develop. COVID certainly impacted our timeline. And so we are just picking that back up.
Yeah.
When we look at the current map for processing capacity in the region, there are gaps. So Metro Central accepts it. We have 2 other private facilities that are permitted to accept it, but don't.
We have 2 other facilities in the system, and one of them is currently accepting commercial organics. The other one, to our knowledge, has not accepted organics yet. So it is a stream that is challenging because it requires investment, but nobody wants to be the first one, right? Or nobody wants to. And then in previous decades, the private sector looks for tonnage to make the investment feasible over time. And with no guarantee of tonnage, then it becomes an unprofitable waste stream, if it makes sense.
So I think in this area, we can bring back both options, set of investments that look at both, all private with Metro funding, and then what it would look like in terms of more transfer station capacity. And some of that might be a public-private partnership.
I don't want to stop any innovation, either on our part or the private, because this is important to get this going. I just, once we make an investment in the infrastructure, we're in it for a while. And so that's why I just want to be careful.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, maybe I'm confused about something here. I agree with most of your summary, but there's really 2 streams of organics. I mean, and they're really very different processes. And one is the food waste and the other one is the general organics. And so we have to remember that we are really talking about 2 different things. And one of the things I like about having Central is because it sort of gives us a test drive of we know the problems that the private sector can encounter, and we can relate a little bit more rather than just purely through contractual agreements, which sometimes are sort of stiff and don't really respond very well. So I think that that's a positive benefit of maintaining what we have at Central. But I've been to some composting facilities and the technology is improved. There's a lot of good things that they are a little more adaptive, I think, than we are. They can move things around, find land, and then move to areas where they know that there's a change in agriculture or something like that better than we can, I think.
Do you want to any other comments before we summarize? Yes, Councilor Gonzalez.
Yes, thank you, Maria Elena. So just 2 things on organics that I want to add and step away for a little bit, so I missed some of the conversation. I know that we've had with our commercial food scraps program, like a slight delay, but I recognize that a lot of that is for global forces, COVID, and our local businesses that ask for delay and things like that. So I'm mindful of that, and also think that bringing that back to council about like, where are we? Where's the progress? I don't think we've seen that for a while, so it'd be really great to get that, so that we're all operating with the same information. But on organics, 2 things. I feel like there's a big narrative component here that we've struggled to communicate to the broader public about why it's so important to divert this from the waste stream and all the EJ stuff. So I want to highlight that. But 2, in terms of more public funding, and want to clarify that my role is like continued Metro presence in accelerating the specifics where we think that there's going to be that value, specifically with some of the ideas that have been incubated at the agency. I do think that, and again, this might be just because we haven't gotten an update or we don't know where we are, but there's a huge utility in the region, in the state, that they have a major goal for decarbonizing their natural gas. And this is an opportunity for us to bring RNG, renewable natural gas. And so I think that it's not just what money can Metro bring to the table. There's the bipartisan infrastructure law, all this EJ goals, but then also a major partner that could bring a lot of money for us to bring this. And I haven't seen that level of partnership execution at the level that I think it could be to really meet our goals on organics. It's just my opinion. And thinking that if we do move forward with, and I recognize we're going to get scenarios, but if we do move forward with this more public, where we have the 4 or 5 cards, that has to be a really big component of how are we bringing in these utility partners to the table, getting their money, their skin in the game, and then trying to deliver shared goals and outcomes here instead of kind of a piecemeal initiative.
I appreciate that. And I do think we are due for an engagement with council on our food waste work. So as part of the next steps, I think it would make sense for us to have that engagement with you prior to talking about these set of investments, just to make sure we have shared understanding of where we've been, where we're at, and clarifying where we want to go. So I appreciate that comment.
Any other observations, comments before we summarize? Yes, Counselor.
Sure, I want to echo Councilor Gonzalez's frame that particularly food waste is one that can be looked at in the kind of current use model and how to innovate from it. But we have to actually look at the bigger ecosystem of how food waste naturally is shifting. And in particular, I want to highlight Elliott Rose's planning grant. That is really paramount because what happens there is going to dictate what we do in the red box outside of just this planning circle. So we need to be really cognizant not to get ahead or behind that planning grant.
Okay, let's move to summary then.
All right, so for the organics, there is general alignment on supporting more transfer and processing capacity, and that we will bring back a set of investments that look at both public and private.
Is there a general nod?
In addition to engaging council on the food waste work in advance of that.
Desire for
Right.
answer.
So it seems that along the way we've done, we've had consensus on these specific areas. So I think we can move to a wrap up. Thank you for indulging us on this interactive activity, and thank you for the invitation to join you. I'll move to pass it to you, Marta, to just wrap us up in terms of next steps.
Yes, so Maria Elena captured much of that. So we've gone through the reuse and repair, the community depots and organics with the wet waste and the private facility regulation and commercial transfer stations. We will also bring options back and have a more in-depth conversation within those areas. So I feel like we are walking away with clear direction. We will present back to you in July. And we are still aiming to adopt the facilities plan by the end of the year. We hope you found this workshop engaging. And if there are follow-up questions or information that counselors are interested in, we're happy to be available at any time. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I just want to say my big appreciation for everybody's. This is a big team effort within the entire PEZ team, WPEZ team. I really appreciate the conversation, because I think and the preparation that went into this on both sides from the council as well. Thank you for being prepared for a conversation that I think we've all been aching to have this conversation, just like how do you do it and how do you walk through the different pieces. So thank you for simplifying it and getting it down to the essence. It's not easy, especially in your field.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks to our team.
so thank you. And we'll move on. You guys can just stay in place if you want, just for another 5 or 10 minutes. To Chief Officer Communication. Yeah. Yeah, I was like, that's.
Just a quick update on our supported housing services, affordable housing conversation. Wrapped up.
Oh, Marisa, could you press the button on your mic? I think it's off.
Hello? There, is that better? Okay. We wrapped up our stakeholder advisory table on May 10th. We have received top line results from some public opinion polling that we've done. We have a preliminary kind of top line report from our community engagement efforts, in which we partnered with the Coalition of Communities of Color, and through them engaged with, over a dozen community organizations representing folks with lived experience, BIPOC communities, really folks that are impacted most by the decisions that we're making around affordable housing. The really interesting sort of preview that I wanted to share is that while a recommendation will be forthcoming among our stakeholders, including the public, there is alignment in the desire for government to fund both services and housing. There's interest in the idea of finding a way to do that within our existing resources, the SHS tax. And the last kind of clear theme that's come through is a desire for better outcomes and more accountability. And so with that very high level framework, the team and I are engaging with county partners, engaging with key stakeholders over the next few weeks to turn that big framework into an idea with details that is ready for you to deliberate and contemplate. So a lot has been done, and those channels of information are starting to come together. I'm grateful to all the staff and all the community members who have been involved. And it's really disheartening to see that we have a community that is caring, smart, and willing to put in the time to make hard conversations happen. So that's the update that I have. Happy to answer any questions.
I just want to thank you for working on this and the entire team, because we can chew gum and walk at the same time. That is proven today in this space that we both have garbage and homelessness. But I think a lot of folks think that, everything else should be put on hold just for this one issue, but we have to be able to move forward, and it's been a tax to our system. And I just want to say that out loud that, the staff have done an amazing job and probably put in a lot of overtime to get us to a point where we can do more with what we have. So thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to Counselor Communications. Yeah, Counselor Gonzalez.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first, and I'll invite folks that went on the trip to share remarks if they do have any. But I think most folks know that we had our JPAC trip, and I think it was a successful time. About 40 representatives from the region, electeds, staffers, transportation officials, agency leaders, and we do what we do best, which is speak with one region when we're in DC and try and bring home the bacon. So I think the bacon, some of the bacon has arrived, but we're going after more. And I just really want to thank in particular Counselor Lewis and Counselor Simpson. The three of us make up the JPAC delegation. And then we had the great pleasure of also having President Peterson with us while we were in DC. One of my takeaways from the trip is that I feel like from the moment we landed to the moment we left, we were working. There was something to do, meetings to be had, and so I feel like we did right by the taxpayers on this trip for sure, in terms of the work and the meetings that we were able to have. And also this year, we added a special element to it, which is having meetings around housing and homelessness. Councilor Lewis went to HUD and met with some HUD folks. And then different groups of us met with our US senators as well to talk about the SHS and the housing bond progress on that, which is, Metro for us, we're learning our muscle on how to talk about housing on a policy level when we go to DC. We're really good at the transportation and we're adding that. So I give a lot of credit to the council as a whole for continuing to elevate the importance for us to tell our story, our narrative around this issue, and then just to be an active player in solving the many issues that we know are alive and well. So I'll leave it there, but yeah, thanks for a great trip.
Counselors. Anything else?
I just want to say real quick, just thank the staff for
Yeah.
all the coordination that went into that trip. It was a lot of coordination. So just want to name that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I was gonna go. Thank you. Thank you. A lot of work by all of the agencies around the transportation in the entire region that helped put that together, but that was the first time Metro had led it and organized it in all of the years I've been here. So thank you to our staff for taking that on, another big lift. So thank you. Anything else? I'm trying to think. Well, as an elected in the room with the 5 people that are watching that have not voted yet, please vote for the zoo. And make sure that that you've put that on your agenda. The investment in our zoo is not just an investment in conservation, but it is also an investment in the future of our region and tourism to our downtown and bringing back our downtown. And I think that we need to make that clear, that it is not just about one thing, but it is about multiple things. And again, we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. So with that, hopefully that turns out well for us tonight. And thank you to Councilor Lewis for leading that charge. And we'll see how it goes tonight. Thank you so much. All right, with that, seeing no further hands raised, I will close our work session, and our next regularly scheduled meeting is this Thursday, May 23rd at 2024 at 10:30 a.m. Thanks, everyone.